Hello, and thank you for joining this module on right to work and immigration compliance training. Part of this is a pre-recorded session held by our immigration lawyer, Anita. So I'm just going to introduce the subject here, and then I will be passing over to the pre-recording of Anita. So Anita works with the Audley group. She does work closely with the Home Office, and she is our advisor on all relations to right to work, immigration, and visa sponsorships, etc. So what I'm going to do is share my screen and start the presentation. Okay, perfect. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. So as I mentioned, this session is covering right to work and immigration compliance. It was delivered on the 10th of May 2023, and we will be updating as and when any changes are made to right to work. So what we'll be covering today is an overview of the law of the right to work, the right to work check process and the changes that happened in April 2022, and explaining about the different UK visa types and skilled workers and red flags and restrictions when hiring. Mm. So the starting point, all UK businesses are required by the Home Office to take illegal working seriously. The Home Office expects employees to undertake compliant right to work checks prior to employment. So here at Audley, we make sure that after the interview, prior to we send out an offer letter, we obtain the candidate's right to work. Once we've received that, it will then go through to HR and they send the offer letter. So your talent acquisition team will support you and make sure that we have obtained the right form of right to work to help you through that process. It is a civil offence to employ an individual who does not have the right to work in the UK, and fines of up to £20,000 per employee can happen. It is a criminal offence to knowingly employ an illegal worker or have reasonable cause to believe you are doing so. Again, up to 5 years prison sentence and an unlimited fine. So I guess it's not here to scare you. It's here to say, as long as we're following the process that we've outlined in this training, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we've got the correct checks in place, then we won't be eligible for a fine. But if we knowingly take somebody on and we know we haven't checked their documents correctly, then you will be liable for this fine. And it's not necessarily Audley, it is the individual who makes those decisions. The Home Office will be looking at certain departments at the moment, which are kind of high priority, which are the care sector, hospitality, nail bars and car washes. They are considered high risk, and here at Audley, we cover two of those sectors, so care sector and hospitality. The importance of getting it right. Preventing illegal working is important, and the punishments for non-compliance are serious. So here at Audley, we do hold a Tier 2 sponsor licence with an A rating. So we have recently started to sponsor candidates to come and work with us, and we do have two within the business. It may be something that we explore further and look to employ more people. But the fact that we've now started that process, we are on the radar of the Home Office, and they could turn up any moment to conduct an unannounced check just to make sure that we are meeting the requirements of our sponsorship. So it will not only just look at the two people on the Tier 2 licence, it will look at all of our team members. So anybody who might be on a student visa, or people who are on indefinite leave to remain, just to make sure that we've got all the correct paperwork against our team members on their personnel file. But yes, so it's just to mention that now that we have that sponsorship and we want to maintain that A-star rating, we are likely to have an inspection by the Home Office. Sorry. So there is a list on a government website. So if people are having received a fine, there is a notification on the website telling everybody who has received a fine. So obviously at Audley, we don't want to be appearing on this list. So as mentioned, there are a couple of hospitality kind of environments here, pizza, grill, this restaurant here. So this is the list we don't want to be appearing on. So in terms of your requirements as a hiring manager and those doing interviews, you are the eyes and ears of Audley. It's at this point I'm going to hand over to Anita, so that she can carry on the session and carry on from here. Thank you.
So why are you on here? So basically, throughout Audley, we've been training sort of the central HR team and the recruitment team, but you guys are actually out in the fields, as it were. So when we're doing the visas for certain people and hiring them, they'll be going into your relevant villages and working there. So your duties really are specifically to be the eyes and ears of Audley. So we're giving you this training so that you know what to look out for and what to report to HR if you've got any immigration concerns. So for example, if you think someone's working illegally, you spot something amiss, or if you have to share, also, sorry, it's really important for you to share relevant information in time as well. So some of these things we're focusing on our prevention of illegal working, but because we also have the license, whenever you're hiring somebody who's going to be on a visa, let's say if you're interviewing them or you've seen their CV and qualifications, you're meant to share them with Audley in a timely manner. Likewise, if you're taking their passport copies when they join, we need that to be sent across on the first day as well. So all those things are really important, that you're the ears and eyes and you're making sure that everything that Nicola and Lynn needs and Ollie needs, they're going to have at the other end. Okay. Yeah, so very much that's your role within the business. Now, the right to work checks, this is really key. So when the Home Office come in, it's really important for them to see that this is being carried out. So the first thing they're going to do is like go through, passports and visas of anyone that's working within your village. And they want to check that before they've joined your business, and the reason I've highlighted in the first paragraph, before they even start work, you have carried out a right to work check. This is because you must be able to prove to the Home Office that each and every member of staff has had the right to work in the UK before they start work with you. That's very, very key. And when we say before, we don't mean 5 o'clock on a Monday after they've worked the whole day. We mean before they even, get into the business and start working. That's very important. And you need to be confident to say to that individual that if they can't prove their right to work, they do not commence work until they've proven that. So I've seen scenarios where youngsters walk in on their first day of work and they're 21-year-olds and they've forgotten their British passports. It's really hard for employers to say, look, and it's your first day, go home and bring your papers in, but that's what you need to be doing. Okay, very, very important. And even more so, that person needs a visa as well, and they can't start without that. So it's very important as well that once you've seen their right to work, that you've got to take certified copies. When I say certified, I don't expect a massive sort of I hereby certified, that kind of thing, but you need to sign and date those copies and share that with HR or scan it into, I think we've got Access now where you can upload it into the system, Nicola. I don't know if everyone on here is using Access, but that's the other way. But you've got to be doing that again at the time that they've started work or before they start work. And you've got to make sure that if you've done all those things, you basically, on the very bottom paragraph, it says that we must ensure that certified copies of right to work documents are properly taken and retained in order to protect the business by creating a statutory excuse against the negligent illegal working offence. What that means is that providing you've done all those steps and you've done the right to work checks correctly and you've got evidence of that, if the Home Office walk in and one of those is an illegal worker because they gave you a deep passport and you're completely innocent and didn't know it was one, you've got an actual statutory defence against any claim against you directly, but also the business. So that's what's so important to prove that you're doing that. If you can do the next slide, please, Nicola, thank you. So when you're doing the right to work check, there's various things you need to go through. And at the moment now, the only thing that you'll be checking in person would be a British or Irish passport, because anybody else now, you're going to be checking using the online systems. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but as of last April and heading to last September, everyone on a visa now, you cannot check their passport manually at all. It's literally only British and Irish passport. So if you've still been checking a foreign passport, as it were, manually, that's been stopped since last year. So what you would be checking manually would be potentially a British or Irish passport. And what the things you're looking out for would be to check that, that it is a valid passport. And that's an example that I found online, which I shared with Nicola and Ollie and Lynn a few weeks ago, where a guy turned up at an airport in the Far East to open his passport to actually see that his child has scribbled over his photo. But was quite a good example of an illegible passport. But yeah, be careful when you're taking the copies of the passports. If you are taking a copy, make sure that when you put it on the photocopier, the copy comes out looking like the person's passport. But when you're retaining on file, it has to still look like the individual. So bear that in mind. The copies you have to be legible. And what you're meant to be doing, we're going to go through the 4-step process. You're meant to ask and view for the List A or List B documents, which is the passports normally. Usually we're saying that you should ask for that at the second interview stage or just before they start work. It shouldn't be used as a means to determine whether you're going to hire them or not. So it shouldn't be that someone applies for a job and you ask for a passport, and if they give you an Indian passport, you're going to say no because they're Indian, even though there's other reasons that say, because you've got to prove that it's not based on nationality, the hiring is not based on that. So really what you want to be doing is at second interview stage, at that point, you can then say, bring your passport in for ID purposes, which you're allowed to do. And then you've got no claims of discrimination potentially being held against you. So definitely you need to bring the passport in at that point. And then you're going to check the validity of the documents if you're taking a copy of it. So definitely have a good flick through, check it looks like an actual genuine passport, and then take a copy of it. And you've got to then certify, and I'll show you what to do on the next page, that you've seen it. But if you're doing a digital upload system, providing your name is shown on that digital upload on Access, that's fine as well. And then just make sure it's also linked to the HR file. So I'm sure with Access, I think it does link it to the HR file, but it's pointless doing all these checks and the Home Office walk in and then you guys can't find the passport copy. So at the end of today's session, I want you all to think about, where are your right to work checks kept, essentially, where you're working? If they must approach you directly, can you point out where they are, and quite quickly? So maybe think about that. And then if you've done all those things I've highlighted in green, that gives you a statutory excuse against any negligent illegal working offence. Okay, so it's just a proof to the Home Office that you have a process and you're following it. Thank you. And the next slide, please. Okay, so on here, I've put an elaborate certification, but the main thing that I'm proving here is if you're taking a copy of a British or Irish passport, you just have to make sure that if you are going to, let's say the old style, you're going to sign and date it. So let's say you haven't got access to Access on that day and you're just going to take a traditional photocopy, then if you're going to sign and date that you've seen it, you've just got to make sure you print your name, your job title, and it's signed and dated. That's all you need to do. And you can write seen by, that's what I would say. Some people put a more elaborate, I mean, that's the gold standard certification, but I think just saying seen by your name and your, printing your name and the date is enough, okay? Just so the Home Office can see that someone in the business has seen it. Now, common pitfalls would be that you take a copy of the passport, but not the relevant page. People have done that. I've seen that. They do the wrong page. That's almost on the cover, the inside cover, not the actual main page we need to see. Poor or illegible copies. Each page of the document has to be signed and dated. So if you're doing a passport photo page and they have a visa inside, you need to make sure you've taken copies of both those pages and signed and dated them. And make sure you sign each of those pages as well. So you might do one page and forget to the others. But again, if they're all in Access, that should be fine. Just also bear in mind that from the 16th of May 2014, if anyone has joined you after that date with an expired passport which has an ILR stamp in it, which is indefinite leave to remain stamp, you can't hire them on that. So bear that in mind, because people are still showing up today with that. So if anyone comes to work on their first day and they say, I don't need a visa, here's my expired passport, I had permanent stay from 2014 or whatever the year it is, but the key point is the passport is expired, you can't hire them. They have to go and get that ILR stamp on a plastic biometric card. So do look out for that. I've actually had officers go out just to visit companies, particularly in the care sector, just to look at that alone. They're looking for people with ILR and expired passports, so check that out for sure again. So that's the other takeaway point I would say is check if you've got anyone in the business that's presented an ILR visa to you, and check at the time they joined you their passport was valid. That's very, very important as well. And there's an image on the left that I thought was quite funny where this guy traveled around the world. I think it was his bus pass or something. So that's a guy showing, again, from a Liverpool newspaper article, showing that how people don't check ID. It's very easy to get away with people just putting something on the copier or not even reading it, and people using things not dishonestly but incorrectly as well. So Nicola, can you do the next slide, please? Thank you. So just the new process that has taken effect from last year. So now from last year, April, and this also applies to EU citizens as well, anyone that joins Audley that has a visa, basically, if they hold a BRP card, which most people with visas will hold, you have to do a check on the BRP card, not on the passport. And you have to do that using the Home Office online portal. So I know that Nicola, Ollie and Lynn, everyone will be doing that, and Catherine, everyone. But if you just be aware, you can't simply at the village take a copy of that person's passport and visa anymore. You have to do an actual online check directly with the Home Office, and it's free, but it has to be done. Sometimes, there's an option to also use an IDSP. So we've got British passport holders now presenting their original sort of passports in the normal way. But Nick, I want you to kind of comment here. So IDSPs are something that is basically the Home Office introduced this identity service provider option, whereby if you guys really, let's say you're a bit sort of nervous or you're not able to check someone's passport because they're far away from you, you can use a third party provider to check the passport for you. And then they give you a report saying, yes, that person's British, they can work, and the passport's genuine. So Nicola, do you want to explain how you're using it at the moment, please?
Yes, so it's something that we've only just introduced, but there is a cost associated with it. So it's not something that we're going to introduce into the villages. It's only really for head office and sales and remote recruiting purposes. In extreme cases in the village, if we need to, then we will use it, but we will stick with people coming into the village with their ID and us taking copies after the interview.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Nicola. So essentially how that works is that, like I said, it's a bit like a DBS check, but it's using a passport effectively. It's a similar thing, but based on immigration. But that is an option if you've got someone that genuinely cannot bring their passport in, or you've got a villager, say, in a really remote location, but then Nicola and her team can help with that. Yeah, but like I said, if they can't bring it in, if they can't use the IDSP, then we're doing the manual check still. Now, the online check process goes like this. So the person who you're hiring, who holds the BRP, has to give you a share code and then also give you their date of birth. So that's literally what they'll give you. And then once you log into the system, you'll see this is obviously taken from the Home Office side. So the example they're given is Felicia Tai, who's given her share code to you and date of birth. And once you enter that into the online system, if you go to the next slide, Nicola, please. Thank you. It will generate this PDF, and the PDF is actually going to show you their photo, which is in that black box on the left, and you can see that. And it'll also say on the right they can now work in the UK. And now this was not as clear, but so if they're EU citizens, also they have pre-settled status or settled status. If they're on a visa, it will say this person has a skilled worker visa. Obviously, it's got to be for you guys, and then they can work until X date. But what's really key here, and this is why I put a blue arrow, it does make a note on the date of the check. And the reason I've shown that to you guys is when the Home Office auditor comes in, they're going to be checking the date the person started work with you against the date you did the check. So if the person started with you on Monday 1st of June, but your check was done on Friday the 5th of June, that's not going to look great. So you need to make sure that date of check is showing either before they start work or in the morning they started work, but not any later. So that's really important. Yes.
Just to add as well, typically prior to the interview, the recruiter during that first telephone interview will gather the information. So if it is a share code that's required, we will get that information. So it's just important that you print it off, tick the boxes to say it is the person, and then you take a picture of that document as that proof of right to work using the Access app.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. That's great. Yeah, so Nicola's made a very valid point. So if you see also on the very left, it does say here, apart from the date of check, it does say that whoever's doing this check on the person, so you've got the photo on the left, it does say, so it's very small print, but it says to avoid a penalty, you must check that this looks like the person that you meet face to face. So it of course be by video, it doesn't have to be face to face, but ideally someone within the business has got to say, yes, this is the person starting work in my village, and you've got to tick the box on the left. And like Nicola said, then somehow that's got to be uploaded into Access. So we've got to make sure that we don't fall down, that the check's done correctly, but then they send their best mate in to work for you instead. It's definitely them joining you. So make sure that that is done before they start work. And then the key points, what we talked about before, the IDSP, which we're using for remote workers in some instances, is that in some cases, you might tell a worker that you want them to use IDSP and they can refuse. So bear in mind that an employer cannot discriminate against someone who is British in terms of the methods that you use to identify them. So a British candidate can therefore refuse to share their passport and refuse to use the online service. So obviously, if someone refuses to give you any ID, which is very unlikely. If they do, then you can say, look, I'm sorry, I can't pursue the offer any further because you haven't proven your right to work in the UK. So it's very, very unlikely. You're more likely to get pushback where someone says, look, I don't want to use an app on my phone. I don't feel safe with it. That's what we're more likely to get pushback. So bear that in mind. They have got the right to say no. Also, in some cases, a British applicant may not have a passport, so bear that in mind as well. So they might produce challenges, which I've shown as a really old birth certificate, like the thing I'm showing there. But if they're going to use a birth certificate, they must also have an NI letter or P45, which is clearly issued by the HMRC. So again, by law, technically, they're proving their right to work in the UK by showing like the birth certificate and the NI letter. But again, the challenge we've got here is that it presents a risk for imposters, doesn't it? Because there's no photo ID on there. So yes, these are just things to think about. And obviously, because you're the ears and eyes of Audley, we would want you to escalate those things to Nicola and the team and Lynn and everyone at Ollie and Catherine, just to let them know that, look, we've got a scenario, and then we would weigh up based on the evidence provided whether we think that that person can continue to work or start work even. So, and then and then the IDSP, I think, again, the other thing to be aware of the IDSP, the Identity Service Provider app thing, is that you can only use it on a valid British or Irish passport. So in law, if someone comes to you and their British passport has expired, at the moment, you can still hire them. So just I always often get that question that someone's turned up and their passport's run out this summer. That's fine. You're actually allowed to hire people on an expired British passport. You can copy that and they can start work, providing it looks like them still. So if I'm producing my passport from me aged 5, then clearly that's not going to work. But if it looks like them and you're confident it's the same person, you can use that expired passport for the manual check, but you can't use an expired passport for the IDSP check. It has to be a current one, which is another flaw in the system, if you're aware of, and to make you aware of it. Okay, so generally, the key points to be aware of are, in terms of the changes to the right to work checks, is that basically now you can't do video right to work checks on British nationals anymore. You can to a certain degree with them face to face, but if you're going to do a check on their passport, they need to somehow have the passport in front of you. The original document's got to be with you. So the manual check has changed and says you still have to have a physical document in front of you, whereas during COVID they were allowing the person just to show their passport, they were allowed to hold their passport on video and do it that way. They can't. They have to now post the passport to you, or somehow you have to have it in your hand and then check it against them on the video. So most people might not want to part with their passport or post it to you. They're probably going to bring it in and show it to you in person. So just remember that no remote checks on documents anymore. It has to be in person if you're doing an in-person check. And then for everybody else, I just said, ensure you're using the Home Office online right to work check for anyone who's joining you with a BRP card. BRP cards will have visas on them. Again, ensure you're doing the online right to work check for anyone who is European and registered in the European settlement scheme. Again, that's an online process now. It's not, it's not something you can do in person or on the passport anymore. It's the online Home Office system. And we also said, think about using IDSP for someone who's got a valid British or Irish passport. If the business allows it because they're living remotely, let's say. Otherwise, you can just check the original document in person. Okay, so those are the 4 key changes. I guess that slide's the main one to really be aware of. So the way I tell my team at work is I say, basically, the simplest way of looking at this now is, unless you're British, basically, anyone that has a visa now, you're checking them online. That's literally the only other way of viewing it. It's a simplified way of looking at it. So if you're European, American, Chinese, Indian, everyone has to be checked now on an online system. The only people you don't check online anymore are British nationals. So the Home Office have really created a very robust digital system where everything is going through the Home Office now. You can't take a person's passport and just keep it on file without checking them with the Home Office first. So it's like a double step you've got to go through now before you hire somebody if they're on a visa. Okay, I hope that's clear. Okay, now these are the various visas that might present themselves when you're hiring. So someone might not necessarily show up with a conventional work permit type visa. They might say, hey, I've got this visa, can you hire me? And I'm going to whiz through really quickly the things that might be presented to you. So a very common one you might see is the entrepreneur visa, which is now known as innovator visa, and they can do any work outside their own business, but they have to be running their own business. So these are for contractors. So contractors could potentially come, let's say, and offer a cleaning service, let's say, to you, but providing they're not on your books and on your payroll, they're allowed to work with you on this visa. So bear in mind, you can't hire them directly if they're on entrepreneur innovator visa, but you can hire them through their companies. And I'd always say you don't necessarily do a right to work check on them, but that visa allows them to work. Okay. And then likewise, it's the same for graduates. Oh, sorry, Nicola, if you can go back to the slide, people. Sorry. Yeah. And likewise, if they're on a graduate entrepreneurial startup visa, those ones are actually for young people who have graduated. So this is graduate entrepreneur, graduate innovator. They can actually work for you on the side, are allowed to. So that's also one thing worth bearing in mind. And you also have then the tier 1 investor visa, where these people have got £2 million in the bank. So they probably don't need to be working if they're sitting on that cash in the bank. But you know, they are allowed to actually, but their main purpose is meant to be to invest in the UK. So you probably see these visas being shared with you. Sometimes family members of those visas holders might come and try and get work with you, and they're allowed to. You can do the next slide. Thank you, Nicola. And then global talent, exceptional talent. Interestingly, that's actually aimed at people, like it says, with a talent. So I've done quite a few in the last year produced for the X Factor. I did some opera singers. I've done various artists. And again, you know, ideally, when they get this global talent visa, they should be then working in that field, you know, because that's why they've got it. But it's really hard for creative workers to get work post-COVID in those fields, although now it's getting better. So they're actually allowed to work anywhere. So some might come to you for care jobs or cleaning jobs. In fact, that's probably a good sort of person to hire, because you don't need to sponsor them under a care visa. They can work for you on the side. So bear in mind that visa allows them to work anywhere. The only challenge they're going to personally have is when they reach the end of their 5-year visa, they have to prove to the Home Office they have been doing some work, you know, in the arts. It might be challenging for them to extend it, but you're definitely not going to have any issues by hiring them. Okay, so that's one in which you can hire. And then tier 2 general, now known as skilled worker. Again, that's what we're using at Audley, but just be aware of this catch, because the skilled worker has to be issued to Audley directly for them to work for you. I've got a lot of, I had one client that approached me, actually got in trouble with the Home Office, where they took on a skilled worker, hired that person for like a good 4 or 5 months, and then the Home Office found out they were working for them because they never actually were sponsoring that person directly. They were actually working for another company full time, and the employer just thought, oh, you've got a skilled worker visa, you can work anywhere. The answer is no, not always. So they got busted, ended up paying a massive illegal working penalty, and I had to kind of explain to the Home Office, you know, their situation. Bear in mind, no one can start work with you on skilled worker visa unless, you know, HR confirm that yes, you've actually done the visa application for them. Okay, there's something else called that you might have is supplementary workers. You might have someone on a skilled worker working elsewhere who then says, oh, look, I'm allowed to work 20 hours on the side and I want to come and work with you. Again, be very, very, very careful about that. That is allowed in the rules, but Audley has to be sure that A, it's definitely identical to the first job that they're sponsored for. B, they can only do 20 hours max a week. But thirdly, which is where there's a catch, the hours can't conflict with the original job. And that's where it's often very, very hard to prove it's not conflicting with the original job, because you may not know what their existing hours are. And often, you know, that immediately becomes a breach. So I've always said to Audley, don't take on employers on supplementary as supplementary workers and skilled worker. You're best saying to that person, okay, we like you, we'd rather hire you directly and apply for your visa to work with us full time, rather than you get them doing stuff for you part time, because it presents a risk. Sorry, that's a bit wordy. If you have questions about it, ask me at the end. But yeah, and then tier 2 intracompany transfer, now known as senior specialist visas. Again, we don't have that Audley, so that's not really applicable to you. Likewise, tier 2 minister, tier 2 sports person, they can't work with you unless, like I said, they're coming in to do sports with you, or maybe be a minister at Audley, but very unlikely that they'll be working for you, and they wouldn't be allowed to onto that current visa. They're meant to be doing the job stated on their visa, which is a minister or footballer or whatever. Now, this is the bit that I want to focus on for about a minute or two. These are kind of students, and they present a very high risk to all businesses, actually. So in fact, let's say the target area or target group that they must focus on when they come in and they do these like illegal working spot checks will always be, as I said to you, the people who've got ILR and expired passport. They'll always ask to see everyone that's got ILR. They want to see that you did the check and the person presented a valid passport the time they joined you. And the second group of students, and what they're looking to see is that most students I'm going to read through each paragraph. So employment is permitted, but this is always subject to any time limits which is stated on their visa. And usually it will say they either have a maximum of 10 hours, 20 hours per week, they can work during term time, but they can work full-time during vacations and when the course is ended for a few months. So what they're looking at when they come in is, has that student worked more than 10 hours or 20 hours? And they're looking at whether you've inadvertently hired them beyond that. And that's, even 1 hour is actually an actual breach, to be fair, to be honest with you, and they can take it very seriously. And then likewise, also they're looking to see that, do you know when term time is? How do you know? So really what they're looking for is that when the student joins you, when you're actually doing the interviewing process and the hiring process, you should be sharing in access with HR evidence of A, that person's a student, tick, and then B, how many hours are they allowed to work? Is it 10 or 20? That's tick. And then thirdly, when is actually term time? And you should ask the student to give you evidence of their course. It doesn't have to be a letter addressed to you, it could be evidence they're enrolled on the course, but their actual term dates, which can be taken from the internet. And bear in mind, you can't normally get those backdated if you're trying to find it later on, because the university only shows usually the current term date. So you need those term dates on file. So if the Home Office were to walk in, you can say, yes, my student did do 40 hours that week, but that he was on holiday because I've got evidence of the term dates. Do you see? That's so critical in this scenario, and that's often where employers do fall down on. And the reason why the Home Office know about it is that there's definitely HMRC reporting to the Home Office on this. I've had a few clients who've had, I've had letters from the Home Office, there's like tip-off letters saying HMRC has said the students earned X amount of money in this time, how they earned it. And I've been able to go back and do a reply. They're called nudge letters, that's what they're called. So it's called a nudge letter, which you get from the Home Office. And it says, look, we want to know about this. And you're able to then hopefully go back and go, oh, yes, the student was actually on leave. We've got evidence that their term finished early, and then that's the end of the matter. Okay, so bear in mind you should be looking at that. And the other thing we're going to talk about a bit later is, how do you keep a check within the village that the students are working those hours? Like, what is your rota system? Is it red flagged that this person as a student shouldn't be working these extra hours? So you really have to treat them slightly differently. Okay. So if we can do the next slide, please. Thank you. The other category workers are temporary workers. A lot of these, I'm just mentioning them here because you've got like creative workers and charity. Sorry, I think you've got a question from Cliff. Is it Cliff Hanslow? I don't know if you want to let them speak, Nicola. That's okay.
Yeah, it is just a really quick one. Sorry.
Sure. No, that's okay. You're welcome.
Does that same thing apply if they're an open university student?
It's all to do with their visa, actually. So what does it say on their visa? So
so as long as they're British, and that doesn't matter.
No, it's just bear in mind. I need to really emphasize that. Thank you. Yeah, so if they're actually on a student visa, that's when it matters. Students generally are fine, but if they're on a student visa, it will generally say on that student visa. So they could be open university on a student visa. It will give a restriction the hours, but generally it's really bad. You've got like two ways of treating students. So if they're British, it's absolutely fine what hours they do, but anyone on a visa, their visa will have the working restrictions on them. But it might be good practice to have the rotas generally for everybody, because you can't be seen to be discriminating them based on nationality. So, but bear in mind that, British students can work more hours if they want to. Hope that answers that question. Okay, thank you. So temporary workers, these are again often allowed to work in the business. As you won't have many of those because in orange I've got creative and sporting. Again, they'd just be doing arts or modelling or whatever. What is more applicable to you, and I don't know if you don't mind doing the next slide, Nicola, is the thank you, is the temporary worker, which is a youth mobility scheme. And I've listed some countries here. I need to look up myself because that list changes, but generally it's those countries. But they're allowed to work anywhere for up to 2 years normally, and then they can switch into a skilled worker visa later. And you might get those candidates approaching you. Before there was a restriction that they couldn't switch. So once we're here on 2 years, they had to go back. The Home Office have relaxed that now. So if you have a candidate, you hire them under youth mobility, let's say in a care role, for example. The problem is you've got is the carer visa as an issue in itself. But if you want to have them temporarily as a carer, let's say, or in any role, you can hire these young people aged between 18 and 30 in any role under that visa. They can do any role, and there's no kind of, apart from national minimum wage, there's no restrictions of salary or pay. And if they're really, really good at the end, you might be able to keep them on skilled worker visa if they qualify under the various criteria that's there. Okay. So, and lastly, these are the other batches of visas. So UK ancestry, again, lots of young Australians, South Africans qualify for this because their parents were British. So that they usually get a 5-year visa and they can work anywhere. And again, that means that you have to sponsor them under the visa, you know, the sponsorship route, which can be quite time consuming. They could just start work with you immediately and do any job again. Likewise, with spouse visas, PPS dependent visas, these are spouses of people that are on visas already. Usually it says no restrictions on them and they can work with you. There are some restrictions where it says nursing and dentistry, so look at that sometimes. But and it also, again, just, you know, one thing I would always really impress upon you is that when you're copying these visas, do read. The front of the visas do tend to say what the restrictions are and the hours and stuff. So do, you know, pay attention to that. We'll probably give some insights to what they can and can't do. And likewise, if someone's got indefinite leave to remain, which is also known as settlement, ILR is the shortened version of that, or permanent stay, all those things indicate they're allowed to work with you permanently. They don't need a visa, but beware of that catch, which I keep emphasising about those who present the stamp in an expired passport. That it could be dodged, because a lot of them were fake during that period. So be mindful of that, because they now need a plastic BRP card instead. Okay. And then just going on to the next subject. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes on this, because I know we booked in for 2 hours, but really I just want to really give you all an idea of the main things to be looking out for. So we may not need the full 2 hours, but I'm going to go through various things that they're going to look at when they come and audit you. So the way it's going to work is that when the Home Office come out and visit Audley, they're definitely going to visit sort of Paul, Nicola and Lynn will get visiting Ollie and Catherine. They'll visit them first, potentially, and it might be announced. So we might, when we say announced, it's not like weeks, a weeks ahead announcement. Usually it's like a day before, or maybe 48 hours. They'll say, look, we're planning to come in on Wednesday. They'll ring you on Monday, or they might just turn up unannounced, which has always been the Home Office's choice of, well, preference really in terms of audit. They don't want you to be prepared. They want to see how you're doing things naturally. Okay, so they'll turn up, but likewise, they may turn up just to Audley and visit just Audley themselves at the head office, but they might at the same time have officers going out to visit all you guys at the same time. So that's the other thing. So and they will randomly usually select 2 or 3 places to visit. And the reason for that is they want to see whatever we're talking about today, that A, it's actually happening, and B, you're applying it. So it's really important they turn up, that you have a kind of process in place. So one thing I did say to Nicola is that they're getting something in place in basically where they're based, but you need to tell everyone, your front of house staff, let's say, if the Home Office walk in, how will you direct them? Like, who will they see? And ideally, it should be you guys who are trained. You don't want somebody that's junior sitting in on the interview or whatever. And immediately, you should be ringing up Nicola and Ollie, or whoever's available, or Lynn, and Catherine, to say, look, we've got the Home Office here, so that they're aware of it as well. Okay. And sometimes, you know, if you're not available, so this is also really important, if you're not available, staff should be able to say to the Home Office, I'm really sorry, you know, like, you know, X isn't here today, can you come back tomorrow? They should come back on another day if you're not there. That doesn't mean to say you should be like in the car park, you know, driving away, trying to run away from them. Obviously, if you're there, you're going to have to do it. But you know, but just have these things in place. That's another action point I'm mentioning today that I want you to do today, is think about, tell the staff the Home Office might walk in and they do look like traffic wardens. They often be in a navy outfit, or they could look plain clothes, but they'll definitely have some kind of evidence that they are who they are, saying they are. But just have that protocol in place and discuss it today. And think about who will sit in that meeting. Ideally, what you want to have is evidence you've had this training. So I spoke to Nicola yesterday, and I think we've got dedicated inbox now, haven't we, Nicola, for immigration? I don't know if you want to tell everyone what that's called. And
yeah, so actually I've got a document that we're going to send out following this training. It's a 10-page Word document covering all of the information of the questions you might get asked during an audit, in terms of what to Audley do, where are you located, what are your processes for storing documents. So a lot of that is done centrally here at head office. So we've got a document that we'll send out to you, and what Anita has suggested is that everybody prints them off and then has a dedicated folder. In the front of the folder, it's also got a list of who the immigration contacts are and the email addresses. So as Anita mentioned, we've got an immigration email box. So any questions or queries you have relating to immigration, you can send straight through to that, and it goes straight through to the HR team to review and respond to you.
okay, brilliant, thank you. So yeah, so and just to recap what Nicola said, so I would say that what I recommend is like my in-house team, because I do a lot of audit. So yeah, just by way of background, just so you know, I didn't just in the beginning. So I specialise in home office visits and audits, and I also sit on one of the home office panels for compliance. I sit on their quarterly meetings, and I also actually am advising the home office at the moment. I'm one of their kind of government advisors on compliance and digital right to work checks. So I advise them and the digital Department of Digital Culture and Media and Sports. So I kind of have a lot of in-house tips that I'm sharing with you guys. And one of the things I know they love is when they come in, the best way to keep a home office auditor quiet for half an hour is to say, oh, look, we have a dedicated, like, you've got to be quite, almost a bit kind of old school, and say, well, actually, we do, you know, we have training. Here is evidence of our dedicated inbox where Nicola and the team send emails to us with regular updates. You want to be able to show them this inbox, which Nick is going to share with you, which is completely immigration dedicated. And then you also want to have a good old fashioned W.H. Smith's binder, an actual binder in the office somewhere, where all the stuff that Nicola sends to you or anything that comes from that inbox is printed out and put in that folder. So when the home office comes in, you can say, yes, I've had training. This is my folder of where we keep the stuff. And then it'll keep them quiet because they'll flick through it and they'll see that A, you're actually getting training, and B, you actually have stuff that you're using. The one thing that officers really hate when I sit in visits is where they're asking you questions and they think you're making up the process on the spot. They're very, very civil servicey in these audits, and they like to see that you're taking it very seriously and that all is invested in a process. Okay, so having these things printed might be a bit of a pain, but definitely have them printed. And that means also when they're asking you questions, you can have the folder in front of you. You can show them various things as well. So we're going to go through the things that will be in that folder. I'm going to go through that with you right now, so you have an idea of the things that they're going to ask you. So one of the first things they're going to do when they come in, they will ask you about the workers in your team, migrant tracking. So what they're going to ask you about will be, do you have evidence of your workers' addresses, like where they are? And this is really important to point out. They're mainly looking at skilled workers, like people on work visas, but generally it's quite good practice to apply across the business anyway. But obviously what they're looking at here mainly is those who are sponsored on visas. So they're going to ask you, do you have their home addresses, and can you retain all their old addresses as well? The reason being is that when they come in and audit the village, they may pull out, and they're allowed to do that because they're the home office. They might randomly select 2 or 3 workers who are on duty that day and call them in and interview them to check also that what you're saying applies in the business is actually happening. And they'll ask those workers, like, what's your current address? And the person will give their address, and they'll say, what's your old address? And then they'll go through the records that you've got to check that you've got a log of those addresses. Okay, so that's really important. You think it sounds like very trivial, but they really want to track everyone's addresses. Likewise, personal contact details like phone numbers, emails, that's fine, that changes, but really addresses are really key here. They want that to be up to date. Likewise, if you've got anybody on a visa, they want to know that the work location that was stated on the visa, they're working at it. So bear in mind that if you've got someone working with you in your village and then you're about to move into another one, let's say, because you might think it's a promotion, that might not be allowed. So bear in mind that the location is key as well. So we have to have a records of where that person's working as well. And also, you need to have a defined process for reporting any changes to Nicola, Ollie, Catherine and Lynn. Basically, people who are sponsored on visas, skilled worker visas, you can't necessarily increase their salaries, which is actually allowed to a certain degree, but you can't definitely change their job titles or completely change location without telling the home office within 10 days of doing it and without them getting, kind of getting approval on it. So bear in mind, that's really, really important that you have a process of reporting changes to HR. And I think, Nicola, we're going to use the immigration inbox for that from now on, or how are we going to do that? If anyone on this call now on this meeting wants to say, look, I've got a member of staff, I'm thinking about promoting them, would you use immigration inbox and then CC all of you, Ollie, Nicola and everyone? So Ollie, Catherine and Lynn as well, or how do you propose to do it?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. At the moment, we have only got 2 people within the business on those sponsorships, so they know who they are.
Okay, great. So I'd say that, when the home office come in, even though you've only got 1 or 2, they want to know as a whole, does the business know how to operate when you start to get more? So I think that's fine, Nicola, for us to say, okay, we're going to use the inbox and also CC whoever we need to CC, but the inbox should be the dedicated resource tool for sharing information. And likewise, that means to everyone on the call that if Nicola, who's manning the inbox, just so I know as well, who's looking at the emails that are coming through?
So it's accessed by Kira, Ollie, Catherine and Lynn, and myself as backup. Yeah.
Brilliant, perfect, great. So then likewise, everybody on this call, if anyone was asked you can say, look, have we got any you know, obviously we write to HR generally, but anything that's immigration based, we have dedicated inbox. And I know it's being seen by at least 5 members of staff at the other end. It's not going into the, you know, into the cloud somewhere, not being read. So that's great, Nicola. Thank you for that. So I think that inbox is really going to help you all to explain how the business communicates, because you guys are the ears and eyes, how you communicate with HR. Well, we have this inbox. Obviously, if it's really, really urgent, you're probably going to ring them as well, but definitely you've got this inbox to use. And likewise, they're going to share information with you as well. And bear in mind also, so the process for reporting changes to HR would be if you've got someone on a sponsored visa, HR has to tell the Home Office within 10 days of any changes. So they have a deadline to work with, which is 10 days, meaning you should get to them before the 10-day deadline's due, so that they have time to report it. So another area that they're going to look at when they come in, they're going to look at your general compliance areas. So this is where businesses fall down in. So for example, we talked about it already. Someone might have fixed hours because they're sponsored on a visa where it says they can only work 37 hours because they're earning exactly 35 grand a year, which is the visa like threshold for their visa. And the Home Office walks in and that person's not just working 37 hours and getting 35 grand. They're actually working 45 hours and still only getting 35 grand. That's actually a breach, because really that means their hourly rate has dropped. So you've got to be very careful that if someone's on a visa and you're told that they're on a skilled worker visa, or likewise a student visa that we've discussed, their hours are restricted in many ways, okay, as to what they can and can't do. So they're going to ask you, how do you operate within each village? Who looks at the rotas? Who agrees them? How do you know when someone's gone over those hours? Like, when is it picked up? Is it picked up weekly, or is it picked up a month later when payroll's run? Because really they want you to pick it up more as immediately. Okay, so that's an audit question that I've seen. And they want to make sure, like in that general compliance box, so yeah, the students are not working excessive hours. They're also looking at your recruitment practices. Are they genuine? So when you're hiring a role, they've scrapped the whole thing, which used to be you've got to advertise in the job centre for 28 days, you've got to advertise another thing for 28 days. They stopped that, but they still want you to prove how you've hired that person, that they are fit for the role. So I'm assuming you guys are all involved in the hiring process. So you might be doing interview notes, you might be doing shortlisting. You need to keep that information if it transpires later on that person's going to apply for skilled worker visa, because what the Home Office wants to know is why did you hire that foreign worker, as it were, over a British person? Were they genuinely good enough for the job? So you need to keep that in a very sort of shorter format, but you need to have that evidence. So I think Nicola, Ollie and Catherine and Lynn will let you know. If it becomes a skilled worker, they'll probably reach out to you and say, guys, we need all the interview notes for all these people. Have you got them? I'm not saying to all of you right now, keep every single interview for everyone in the business you're hiring. The answer is that you don't have to necessarily, but definitely you need to do that when you're hiring someone that's on a skilled worker visa. So Nicola, on this call, is there anybody? I know we hired 2 recent chefs, didn't we? Is anybody on this call that from those villages, that run those villages, or?
Yeah, Cliff.
Oh, okay, yeah. So Cliff, if you're doing the interview notes on that, then you need to make sure that you share that with Ollie and obviously Nick and everybody, so that if the Home Office come in, I know definitely at my end I've seen all the kind of references and stuff that Ollie shared with me when we did the visa applications. But yeah, the background stuff would be really useful, because it just gives you a gold star then to show that you're doing it really well. Okay, just simply being, because although just the UK knows it's blooming hard to get chefs, but they still want to prove that you're not hiring your best mate's son. You've got to show it's a genuine hire that's come through an actual process. Okay. Okay, and then likewise, yes, and also leave requests. I put that in there. So bear in mind that if you're on a skilled worker visa, this is only skilled worker visas again, so that's like work permit stuff, that these people can't have 28 days unpaid leave in any 12-month period. So bear in mind, if any of your chefs could say, well, actually, I haven't been home for ages, I need a month off now, I'm really happy to be unpaid, you have to pay me, I want to go home for like 6 weeks unpaid, and you say yes, that's basically the end of their visa, and not many people know that. So they're allowed to have 28 days unpaid in a 12-month period, but once they hit 29 days unpaid, you have to terminate their visa. That's to prevent people doing sabbaticals and things like that. If the reason's legitimate though, so if it's adoption leave, paternity leave, adoption, paternity, maternity, and like sickness, like genuine sickness, and you've had to unpay them, that's absolutely fine. But again, we need to put a report in the system to say that's why they're not being paid, if that makes sense. But genuine sabbatical or holiday things, that they can't do that anymore unpaid. They can do it paid in their normal way, but not unpaid. So therefore, there needs to be a reporting process between you and HR to let them know if that request has come through, so that somebody doesn't accidentally approve it. Okay, and also the 28 days don't have to be together. So let's say if someone says to you, can I have 2 days off per month over the next 12 months, you know, 3 days off to do something like I want to take up a sport? Again, the answer is no, because that whole accumulation of the 28 days across 12 months means you have to end their visa. Okay, so it's a little thing to be aware of. The next thing to look at is processes. So what they're going to ask you when they come in and audit you, who is policing this process? Like, so all of you, can you confidently say, like, who is overseeing the immigration processes at Audley? So hopefully your answer would be that, yes, we've had training. You know, we've got Nicola, Ollie, Catherine, and also Kira, and also sort of Lynn are all, you know, all in charge of, and they're policing the process centrally. We share all the information we've got with them through our dedicated immigration inbox, and likewise, we're only the ears and eyes. That's what your answer should also be. Actually, all the actual main kind of compliance stuff is done by the central office. It's really key that you guys say that, but you can also say our functions are taking copies of things and sharing it with them, and we do certain checks ourselves, but really the main primary function rests with central HR. I think Nicola would agree with that as well. That's how we want to do, because all the stuff's collated at your end. Is that right, Nicola and Ollie?
Yeah, they've got password protected Excel sheets, and I know you said that they don't like each individual location having their own spreadsheet. It's all kept together.
Yeah, that's right. So to a certain degree, you know, so I would say that what you want to have, it's fine for each care home or village to have their own stuff, but you need to be sharing your central office, as it were, as well, so they can say they've seen it as well, and make sure that if you're keeping stuff on site, it's very safe. So I would say, who's policing the process across Audley? That's one question. And then who is policing the process within your own village or your care home? Like, who is in charge? So that's what we talked about, like when the homeless come in, who are they gonna call in for an interview? Decide, you know, who it will be. Think about that. So who was this the UK I visit? Where are your documents stored? So they walk in and they see that all your HR files are like on the floor, or for example, they're in a cabinet, but that cabinet's not got a key. That's a fail. So you've got to make sure it's very securely stored with no risk of it being tampered. Likewise, how is information shared across the business? We talked about the inbox already, that email inbox, which we're going to start using. But like Nicola just said, that spreadsheet everyone's got, you know, make sure that if there's any updates, you know, I guess that Nicola's also got that same information at her end, because you don't have anything that's like not aligned. So make sure anyone you're hiring, they know about it. There's nothing worse than they walk into central office and then they don't know about someone you've hired in one of the villages. They have to be fully aware of everything that's happening in a timely manner. And also, how do you escalate immigration queries internally? Like I said, use the inbox, but also ring if it's an emergency as well. I'm also there in the background. So just so you know, I support Ollie and the team and Nicola and everybody in Lynn. If there's any questions, they will come back to me if it's complicated, and my team at Sheridan's will help. But definitely the first port of call for you guys would be to go to Nicola, Lynn, Ollie, Kira and Catherine. Thank you. The next slide, please. Thank you. And other audit red flags would be general right to work checks. We talked about that already, but that, like I said to you, if you fail the right to work checks, you kind of fail everything. So, because the reason being, if they find an illegal worker, it doesn't matter how brilliant we've been storing everything or that you've got everyone's addresses. If they're illegal, then you fail. So really, we want to make sure that you've got a right to work check process and it's done correctly. So again, what I was going to ask you is, within your care home in your village, who is doing the right to work checks? It should really be one of you guys, because you've had the training. The risk is that if they, for example, you've got someone doing work experience that week, and I've seen that actually happen. I went to an actual site where they had like the girl on reception was work experience. Anyone that joined that day, she was like copying the passports and stuff, and that was her role. And I said that wasn't good enough, because the person's meant to be checking that it's a genuine passport or not. So your 15-year-old on work experience wouldn't be the person. Ideally, it's fine. I mean, it's absolutely fine though for you guys to say we've checked the passport and then handed it to them to copy. But you want to be able to confidently say in an audit situation you've got an actual process, that the checks are being done, the passport's being handled by one of you and seen, because you need to hold the original document. So again, what is your process? And that's what the Home Office will ask you when they come in. How does it work? Where do you then retain that evidence? So we talked about you're going to upload in access. That's what you'll have to tell the Home Office. And do you have a system in place with adequate training? The answer is going to be yes. So today, after today's training, Nicola, I want you to send an email out to say, maybe like a list of attendees, to say, I can confirm you've attended, and like, you know, Sheridan's right to work, legal working training, blah, blah, blah. And then send that to everybody through that inbox. And that's your proof of attending. That covers you. The reason why it's so important, guys, is if the Home Office walked in tomorrow, there's a legal worker in your site, you can say, look, we have the training, I try my best, you know, you're showing that you're taking it seriously. That would greatly minimize the risk of it becoming a criminal offence, maybe just a piddly civil offence, if not nothing at all, do you see? So we really want to show that you're taking prevention and legal working very, very seriously here. So yeah, keep that evidence of training in a file somewhere, put it in your actual binder that you've got coming in, that you're going to buy from WSS. So in that binder, have that evidence of training in there. We already talked about who is checking passports and visas, because there'll be an online system now. So Nicola, are you proposing that when the person starts and they have a BRP now, will these guys be using online checks for you, or will you guys do that for them?
So typically we do it prior to them starting, prior to them we giving out an offer letter.
Okay.
So the recruitment team will establish what form of ID is required, and then work with the general manager to say they'll be providing a British passport, or they'll need to do a share code. You'll need to print and sign this. But we make sure that the hiring managers upload their right to work documents before any offers go out.
Okay, great. Okay, brilliant. So make sure you're all following that process. I think in that handout you're giving Nicola, you're going to give like a step-by-step guide to when things are shared. Okay, perfect, great. And I'm going to review that before it goes up. That sounds good, thank you. And then yeah, so also like I sort of said to you, these are questions the Home Office are looking at. So how are you sharing this information with the HR, and when being quite key? Is it like 2 weeks later, or, you know, and if you're on holiday, who's covering for you to do those things when you're away? So again, timeliness is very key in this. Then the second thing they're going to look at now is, like, let's say you guys are great. You've hired somebody, like, you know, Nicola's done her check before someone's joined, you've given all the documents. So the person starts off becoming, you know, lawfully working with you. Everything's all hunky-dory and they're working legally with you. But then their visa expires, and that's often where businesses fall down, is when the visa expires, like no one bothers to check. So when they join you, if there is a visa expiry, which will now not necessarily show up on because like we said, we're not using the BRPs anymore, we're using the online check. So the visa is going to be on that PDF that's generated saying, Ken, you know, Smith has got a visa to work from X date to Y date. That visa expiry date has got to be documented somewhere. So again, Nicola, is that now going to be kept centrally, or are we going to keep that within each village?
Yes, so it's kept centrally. Kira and Ollie update a central document explaining which visa everybody's on. They do monthly reporting to see who's going to expire, and then they'll reach out to the relevant team member and village to request an updated copy.
Okay, amazing. So the reason that's important is, for example, if we're doing a skilled worker visa, we're managing it ourselves, aren't we, Nicola and Ollie? So we're doing the whole visa process ourselves. We know when the visa is expiring, we're logging it, and that's we know ourselves 100% when it is. But if you guys are hiring remotely, let's say, and you've got somebody, let's say, on a student visa that's expiring soon, or they're on there might be a spouse on a spouse visa, which allows them to work without having to necessarily tell HR to begin with. So that visa expiry date is equally important, that we have to log that as well, because if that student overstays and works with you, or that spouse overstays and works with you, then it's just as bad as having an illegal worker generally, you know, commence work with you. So you need to make sure that you're all keeping an eye on visa expiry dates. Even people just coming to work for a week, we've got to make sure that visa expiry date is logged with HR. I hope that's really clear. Okay. And again, it's these people. So just, you know, how it pans out is, let's say that person works with you for, like, they've got on a monthlies and they overstay, then it might be that their landlord tips off because their visa expired, and it goes full circle back to the Home Office, and then the Home Office will then say, oh, where they've been working, it comes back to you. Do you see? That's literally how all the government departments all work together now. So the landlords have to report to the Home Office, banks report to the Home Office, everyone's all interlinked now through this online system. So that's how they can find out someone's working with you when their visas overstay. Not someone reporting, like giving, you know, shopping them in within Audley, but another third party body saying, actually, our records show they're still at Audley, they shouldn't be there. Do you see? So it's really key that we're on this and we stay on top of this. Okay, and then the other thing is record keeping. What I'm showing on the right is obviously someone's really messy bedroom with files everywhere, and hopefully your offices don't look like that. I'm sure. I think my house looked a bit like that during lockdown, to be honest with you. It's definitely better since then. But I would say, yeah, when they come in, record keeping is really important. So where are you keeping your records? So for example, like Cliff hired the chef, for example, and did the interview process. Where is the CV? Has that been shared with Ollie? Do we have all the qualifications on file? If we say that person's an amazing chef with specialities in sushi, do we have that evidence still? Like, where is that evidence? Because sometimes what happens in the business that people move. So I'm not saying Cliff is going to leave, but let's say Cliff will still move on and the home was walking later on and they want to see that information of that hire. It's not good enough to say, well, Cliff did it and he's gone now, we don't have it anymore. It's got to be centrally stored somewhere. And I think, again, I think that's, is that in Access as well, Nicola? Is that all being stored there?
We've got the ability to store it in RQ, the recruitment system. So all interview notes from now on, we've got the facility to be able to upload them. And then Ollie's got their personnel file on the central HR drive with all copies of that.
Okay, brilliant. So as long as we're all following the same system, again, that'll be in the notes that go out. So upload everything so that, you know, that if the home was walking at any point, we can show that we have a really good system, which everyone's following uniformly, you know, which is great. And then, yeah, and what is your recruitment process? So make sure everyone's following a similar process. So like where, if you're advertising, they may want to see where you're advertising. They might want to see, like we said, hiring notes. I'm repeating it again, but again, they're not so prescribed now where you advertise, as long as you've got some evidence of how you're doing it. The other thing they're going to look at is proof of payment. So if you're saying you're paying somebody a stated salary and they're on a skilled worker visa, again, a work permit visa, you can't be seen to be underpaying them. So they might ask to see their wage slips. And again, they'll usually allow you 24 hours to get that. So just but be aware they'll ask about that. So be careful about underpaying people. Or let's say one day Bax isn't working, you pay cash in hand. That's not allowed. I saw a client get in trouble for that, where something happened to his bank and he paid his staff in cash for 3 months. That was a major breach and he lost his license. So just bear in mind that you have to pay everybody like electronically. And the final thing with record keeping would be, you know, if you've got anything that's on a computer, like spreadsheets of visa dates and things like that, make sure it's password secure and that not everyone within your care home or village can access it. The reason being is the home office will ask you to see that spreadsheet when they come in, and they'll want you to take them through the process of getting into your computer to see the spreadsheet. And they'll want to see that there's a password there. So if you haven't got one, implement that today, make sure there's a password there. Likewise, if you've got files sitting around your office which relate to HR files, make sure they're in a locked cabinet. So maybe speak to Audley if you need that investment, but it definitely has to be locked, you know, when it's not in use. So those areas I've just talked about, I try to really simplify it because those are the things that I see come up as reasons why people lose their license, actually. So when the homes come in, they might say, they kind of break them into 6 categories. They might say, well, you failed in the record keeping area, and that's a fail. And then it might just seem really minor, but when you've got loads of like minor non-compliances, they then all add up and they could become a reason to downgrade somebody or to revoke their license, you know, which is the worst case scenario. So if providing you're doing all those things within where you're working, you're applying them, you're familiar with it, then you shouldn't fail any audit. You should hopefully pass it. If you have got one thing slightly wrong, they'll probably let you off, but majority of things you should be doing, and hopefully they're not too complicated. So if you can do the next slide, Nicola, that's okay. So it was very quite short and sweet sessions. I don't know if you have any questions you want to ask about anything I've covered today, or any kind of specific scenarios you want to raise with me to see if I can help.
I think Thomas has got his hand up.
Okay,
yeah, and Anita,
hi.
thank you very much. That was very informative.
Okay, thank you.
Just 2 things. Obviously, if we're doing all our due diligence and we can prove that, and if you have, for example, you would employ a student who is on a 20-hour visa,
yes.
If they elect to get a second job somewhere else,
yes.
Obviously people try to get hours somewhere else, but it's without our knowledge. I'm assuming we can then demonstrate that that's not our problem.
Exactly, very good. That's really good. That's a textbook scenario I give people, actually. That's a really good one to raise. So yeah, so providing they're doing the 20 hours with you and you're covered, if that student goes off and works 20 hours in Tesco's, 20 hours, which is clearly like now they're doing 60 hours, you're covered because you've covered your kind of requirements to ensure they're not working more than 20 hours with you. Yeah, and that's a perfect scenario, because that's how the student often gets in trouble. So let's say they do the second job, then the Home Office finds out that they're doing the second job at Tesco, because Tesco's have a raid. That's how it will come back to Audley, and they'll check what they've been doing with you, and providing you've never gone beyond the hours, you're fine. So that the answer to that, Thomas, is yes, you're fine, providing you're doing it correctly yourself.
Secondly, if we would have a supply company to us,
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming they obviously are in charge of their own due diligence with the Home Office, so they need to do theirs. But if we have a suspicion that their quality checks or what they're doing is not accurate, how would you treat something like that?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So if somebody, just bear in mind that when you're doing right to work checks, it's only on employees of yours. So if they're on payroll, it's your responsibility regardless. If they're coming as contractors, or let's say self-employed, then really you need them to self-declare somewhere that the checks are being done, and then you're covered. So if you're using a third-party contractor, providing Nicola and Ollie and everyone, even you, Thomas, have an agreement with the supply agency saying, we confirm we are doing our own right to work checks, and that everybody who works with you has a right to work, you're covered by that contract, and the Home Office won't go anything beyond that contract. But if you haven't got something like that, then you're required to do your own checks in addition. So you need to review your contracts with any suppliers to make sure that that's in there. Because Home Office guidance says that you don't have to do checks on self-employed people, but obviously it can be reputational damage if they're found to be working on your site, even though they're not your workers, will make sense. But what you want to avoid is any kind of like, fines or anything like that, or any criminal action. So if you've got that contract saying that they're doing it on your behalf, that's fine. Now, I have got a scenario there which you need to be careful of, where you've got, let's say you've got independent contractors coming to you and they say they've got their own companies. So Nicola, I had this at Christmas, actually, nothing to do with like Audley, but I had a company, and I'll give you this example, Thomas. I had a client come, and he was actually a refugee who'd overstayed. And there's actually a kind of loophole where anyone can open a company in England, like anyone can. They don't do immigration checks. So he opened up a company, got a job, I think, doing something for my client, worked with him for a week, and then something happened where HR didn't know he had a company, and they didn't have to do a check on him because he's self-employed. HR did do a check, and it came out that he was an overstayer. So immediately they rang me and they were like, we've got a problem, this guy's an overstayer. And I was like, but technically he's got his own company. And then I actually spoke to the guy and said, look, you've set up a company, you're illegal in the country. And his words to me was like, yes, I know, but I'm allowed to work through a company, and I'm going to sue you and everyone. So basically we ended up getting rid of him, and our client's protected. So Thomas, the client's protected because technically he was never an employee, was he? He was always the company owner. So they have that protection, but we still got rid of him. But that's what I'm trying to tell you. There are people out there running companies as individuals, and they're overstayers. So you're better off going, not with those one-man band shops where they have their own companies. You're best going for an actual agency. Let's say that kind of scenario is a better fit. Does that make sense to all of you? I think that's a better fit. So be wary of one person coming up to you saying, I am Jack Smith Limited, and you're thinking, fine, I don't have to check you. But what if Jack Smith Limited is a dodgy company? That is the issue. It's a really weird scenario, but it does happen.
Yeah, it's just about being knowledgeable about their practices, even so they're being checked through the procurement system and they are having a working contract with us. But if you find out through other ways or means that they are, overstaying their workers, then it becomes tricky, because it becomes a moral thing. Then should I whistleblow or not?
Exactly, and that's exactly the scenario that our client found themselves in. So they decided to let him go. They paid him for what he did, because technically he's allowed to be paid through the company, but they ended it like that. But you're right, Thomas. But I think, having said that, Home Office now, I think if the Home Office walk in that scenario, like you're saying, you've got entire procurement process, you've got contracts. That all sounds very, very robust. So that's what you want to say to them. You want to say to Home Office, look, we have a very diligent procurement process, and we have contracts saying that they're doing the checks themselves, and anyone that's employed as an employee, self-employed people go through our procurement process and they're checked. Okay, and that's your response to that. Okay, hope that makes sense. I know it's quite a wordy response I gave, but I hope that helped. Okay. Is there anything else you want to ask at all? I don't know if there's anything that I haven't covered today. So if there's anything I haven't covered, then do feel free to drop me an email, Nicola. I'm very happily to answer anything that I missed today, Nikki will share my email address at the end as well. But hopefully I've covered everything. And I think that the whole purpose of today is that if a home office walks in tomorrow, you've had training. And that's literally what we want to demonstrate, is you've had it. So you've now done that. Hopefully you're going to walk away with a few things that you've learned today. And you're going to be a bit more mindful of certain things like record keeping, you know, storing stuff, sharing information, you know, and also the inbox that Nico's going to share with you, the dedicated immigration inbox will be a prompt for you to hopefully think about that more in terms of, you know, and obviously don't share random stuff that's non-immigration related in there. Try and keep very immigration focused, but hopefully that's going to be a very good resource, and we'll definitely impress the home office when they walk in if you've got that as well. And do get those binders and print those things out and keep that in your office somewhere. So when the officer walks in, you can make them a cup of tea and just hand it to them, and that should hopefully impress them a bit. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.